Why does Syria matter to Israel and Turkiye? The two countries held talks in a bid to avoid confrontation there. Benjamin Netanyahu's government says Turkish military bases in post-Assad Syria are a red line. But what if that line is crossed? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Israel and Turkiye have been holding closed-door meetings in Azerbaijan to work out ways to avoid direct conflict in Syria. Both countries have a military presence there and accuse each other of threatening regional security. Israel has carried out hundreds of airstrikes on Syria since Bashar al Assad was toppled in December, destroying military infrastructure and hardware. Turkiye says these attacks and Israel's expansion beyond the occupied Golan Heights are further destabilising the country as the new government tries to rebuild. For its part, Israel has accused Ankara of trying to turn Syria into a Turkish protectorate. US President Donald Trump has offered to mediate, boasting good relationships with both Israeli Prime Minister and the Turkish President. So what are the two sides trying to achieve, and can they avoid coming to blows over Syria? We'll speak to our panel in just a moment, but first this report from Ferdy Akar.
An airbase in central Syria in ruins, one of three targeted by Israeli forces last week. The facility in Hama was among several Turkey had reportedly offered to upgrade for the new Syrian government. Since Bashar al Assad was overthrown in December, Ahmed al-Sharaa, the new president, has repeatedly said he doesn't want conflict with Israel. But Israel has carried out several hundred strikes on Syria. At a UN Security Council meeting on Thursday, Israel was accused of destabilising the country.
Every day that the Security Council delays upholding its responsibilities and maintaining international peace and security and ending the ongoing Israel aggression against my country, the potential for instability increases.
Israel has also expanded its positions in Syria's occupied Golan Heights, taking over a UN buffer zone, which it says is necessary to defend its borders.
Let me be clear. Israel does not seek territorial gains in Syria. Our operations are precise and rooted exclusively in threat neutralization. Where threat exists, we will meet it without hesitation.
But while Israel says it's eliminating threats, its ground operations have killed and displaced civilians. And despite strong words, the UN Security Council has been unable to restrict Israel's military actions. One of the Syrian opposition's strongest backers, Turkiye, is now looking to draw a line. Ankara's support was vital to rebel group survival and eventual victory over the Assad regime. Turkish troops have been on the ground in Syria since a 2019 incursion against Kurdish-led forces in the north. Publicly, relations between Israel and Turkey are at their lowest point in years after Israel launched its war on Gaza in October 2023. But behind closed doors, the two countries began direct talks in Azerbaijan on Wednesday, aimed at avoiding escalation. Israel says it wants to prevent any large-scale Turkish deployment in Syria. While Turkish troops were reportedly preparing to take control of the T4 airbase near Palmyra, the Israeli Air Force struck first. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government says Turkish control of the base would cross a red line. US President Donald Trump has offered to help mediate.
I told the Prime Minister, I said, just, baby, if you have a problem with Turkey, I really think I'm going to be able to work it out. You know, I have a very, very good relationship with Turkey and with their leader, and I think we'll be able to work it out.
The vacuum left by the fall of Assad has left Syria vulnerable. It can't prevent Israeli attacks, and it relies heavily on Turkey's support. War-weary Syrians can only hope the two powers will be able to avoid a greater escalation in their homeland. Ferdy Akar, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's get some analysis now with today's guests. And joining us from the Turkish capital is Barin Kayaoglu, an assistant professor at the Institute for Area Studies at the Social Studies University of Ankara. In Norman, Oklahoma, Joshua Landis, director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma, And in Tel Aviv, Alon Liel, former director of Israel's foreign ministry and an international relations commentator. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us to get the inside story of what is going on in Syria and with regard to these other regional players. Barin, if I can start with you. If we go back to November last year, President Erdogan actually said he was cutting ties with Israel. Despite that, I don't think formal diplomatic relations were ever cut. The reason at the time was because of what Israel was doing in Lebanon and what it continues to do in Gaza. But that's not, is it? I'm right in saying that's not why we're having these crisis talks now. This is all about Syria.
That is correct. And I believe the incident that you're referring to regarding President Erdogan was a bit of a misunderstanding. I think he was referring to the fact that Turkey had cut trade ties with Israel about a year ago, and that somehow it got lost in translation. To put your specific point into context, you're absolutely right. In recent months, specifically since the fall of the Assad regime in Syria on December 8th, Israel has intensified its attacks against both tactical targets, but also strategic targets, military installations, radar installations, listening posts, etc. Against property that used to belong to the Syrian regime, but now is under the control of the new administration in Damascus. And because the new administration in Damascus is allied with Turkey, and Turkey plans on training the new Syrian military, that the risk of an escalation between Turkey on the one hand and Israel has increased, and hence why we're here.
OK, Alon, I know you're not in any way a spokesman for the current Israeli government, but perhaps you can give us an idea of the motivations there in Israel. Why is Israel repeatedly bombing Syria? Why has it taken swathes of further territory, which it's calling a buffer zone? This is a clear breach of the country's territorial integrity, and there's been no threat that I've heard coming from the new Syrian government. I think many experts would believe it's a breach of the UN Charter too.
So first, it is a routine of the last few years that Israel is attacking in Syria, while the Iranians were there and transferring weapons and ammunition to Hamas and Hezbollah. And it was always coordinated with the Russians, but we had attacks in Syria on a weekly basis. So this is going on.
Yeah, but Alon, I mean, I'm sure you're going to get to that, but I mean, there is no Iran justification anymore, is there? I've not seen any. I mean, there was this axis of resistance when Assad was in power, but I've not seen any outreach or goodwill from the new government in Syria to Iran or Hezbollah. The justification for that bombing, as you say, has gone on for many years. That's disappeared, has it not?
You are correct. You are correct. But after the 7th of October, you have a traumatic country that suffered an attack that humiliated it and caused damage, severe damage to the country. So once Israel saw that there is an opportunity to destroy the Syrian army with a new regime that it believes will be hostile to Israel, it started destroying the Syrian army. So there are two purposes here, I think. Less weapons in Syria that can be used against Israel in the future. And two, to make sure that we keep the Golan Heights and there will be no military or hopefully diplomatic challenge to our stay or Israel's stay in the Golan Heights. So these are the main reasons. One, less weapons in Syria is less danger for Israel. Two, the wider we are there territorially beyond the Golan Heights, it will keep the argument on the extra territory that we added and not on the Golan Heights.
OK, Joshua, what do you make of Israel's justifications for this. We've had the Defence Minister, Israel Katz, who's described Ahmed al-Shara, the president of Syria, the current president of Syria, as a jihadist terrorist of the al-Qaeda school. He has said he's got nothing to do with al-Qaeda anymore.
Right. Well, Syria is extraordinarily weak. Israel is very strong, as we've seen, and has been able to largely destroy Hezbollah and Hamas, and pin back Iran's ears, and of course help to overturn the Assad regime and place Ahmed Shara in power. So Israel is sitting astride a Middle East that's very broken, and it would like to see Syria remain weak and divided. That's the best scenario for Israel, because Turkey has a great deal of influence in Syria, and it does not want to see Turkey build up a strong Syria and begin to roll back Israeli free passage over Syria, for example, for its airplanes, its ability to keep the army weak, or to set up anti-aircraft missiles in Syria that would stop the Israeli Air Force from having free reign over Syrian territory. And to that end, Israel has bombed Syria about 700 times since Ahmed Shara took power, and has told the Syrian army that it cannot deploy south of Damascus, and has encouraged the Kurds and the Druze to demand a large degree of federal autonomy in Syria, which would keep the government weak. So that's that's what's good for Israel. Of course, it's bad for Turkey. But Turkey holds a lot of cards because it is strong on the ground. Shara likes Turkey. Many of the ministers in Shara's government, the new government in Syria, hold Turkish nationality as well. And they're looking to Turkey to help rebuild Syria. So the Shara government wants to rebuild its military, become stronger, and to have close relations with Turkey. And this presents a big problem for Israel, who's fearful that Erdogan, who just said the other day that Zionist Israel should be destroyed, is going to become an enemy even stronger than Iran. And so it wants to keep Turkey out as much as it can.
Alon, I'd like to drill down with you the Israeli views of the link between the new Syrian government and Turkiye. As Josh says, there are certainly links. Can I take you back to December the 8th? Does Israel, from what you are hearing of what the government's thinking, does it believe that Turkey masterminded all of this, the fall of Assad, or does it think the reality is a bit different, that Turkey kept its distance from HTS, was a little wary of it, but of course had a bond because they both were opposing Assad, and then when the offensive was perhaps, as some say, much more successful than even al-Shara thought it was going to be, then Turkey took advantage of the situation. Which one is it?
I think it's in fact both. I think in Israel the view is that Turkey was involved all the time in both the Kurdish situation in the north and the opposition to Assad. It assisted the opposition, and it tried to capture as much territory as it can from the Kurdish areas. But I don't think these activities of Turkey were necessarily what toppled Assad, or the only thing that toppled Assad. And when Assad was removed, Turkey kind of used the opportunity and presented it as the main supporter of the opposition. But I don't think this matters a lot. I don't think Israel is occupied with the question who toppled Assad. As Joseph said, Israel is occupied with the question, what will happen if Turkey goes down militarily, and sees this scenario of Turkey inside Syria maybe as more dangerous and complicated than the Iranian-Russian stay until not long ago. The reason is that there is a feeling here that if Turkey goes down with its army, with its air force, it will not allow us to control the skies of Syria with our air force. What the Russians did, not only the Russians allowed us attacks, the Russians coordinated with us the attacks in order to avoid casualties for themselves. So I think there is a great worry, if not fear, that Turkey will go down and capture especially Air Force bases, and Israel is very seriously getting ready for such a scenario.
Of course, international law says that you're not allowed to control the skies of another country unless there is a great threat, and you are requiring self-defence under Article 51 of the UN Charter. Moving to you, Barin, let's talk about Turkey. You've heard the other two guests talk about the power of Turkey in the new Syria. Is Turkey pulling the strings?
I don't think Turkey is pulling the strings. We saw some indication to that when, upon taking office, the new Bashar administration put on additional tariffs. You know, tariffs are the big issue in international trade these days. But in order to rebuild their economy and also bring some additional revenue into the new government, they raised some of the tariffs on Turkish goods and services. In addition, they also started charging Turkish citizens who were visiting Syria upon the fall of the Assad regime with heftier visa fees in order, again, to increase the revenues for the new state. Now, these may appear as small examples, but as your questions earlier indicated, with respect to when HTS was in control of the Idlib area, the Turkish armed forces acted as a shield against Assad and the Iranian forces and Russian forces to protect HTS. But by and large, HTS ran the Idlib area autonomously. Now, there were obviously connections.
Barin, I'd like to move forward to the present day, if I can. What is the Turkish military actually up to? Because there seems to be growing activity. They've been visiting air bases across Syria. They've been planning, I think, to refurbish those air bases, equip those air bases, and many would say make them Turkish air bases.
I agree with you up to the point, James, when you said Turkish air bases. We don't have clear indication to that effect yet. But to answer the first parts of your question is to basically retrain the Syrian military. In the run-up during the civil war, there were hundreds of different militias. Most of them have now come under the authority of the new government in Damascus, but they are still trained per different doctrines. They have different weapons, different discipline levels, and what the new administration in Turkey would like to do is have a leveling effect where all of these disparate elements train together and become essentially units, a new Syrian army. That's the broader aim here. And honestly, before Israel, there are more pressing threats against Turkey in the form of the Syrian Democratic Forces, which Turkey sees as a continuation of the militant organization, Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK. But more importantly, ISIS. I mean, they're by and large defeated, but many of their elements, hundreds of fighters belonging to ISIS, are still hiding in various oases in the Syrian desert. And Turkey would like to make sure that ISIS does not have a return, if you will, and help the new administration in Damascus to avoid that very outcome.
Joshua, at the beginning of the month, the 2nd of April, we've talked about all these airstrikes. There was a specific airstrike which took out a number of these air bases, notable among them the one that's known as T4 in Homs province. That's near Palmyra, which many people may know is an ancient city and one of the most important archaeological sites in Syria. After that, the Israeli foreign minister, Gideon Saar, said they're doing their utmost to have Syria as a Turkish protectorate. It's clear that is their intention. Do you believe that is Turkey's intention?
Well, I think Turkey would like to have a great deal of influence in Syria. It is a neighbor. And the problem for Syria is it needs a military. its navy has been bombed and destroyed, all of its bases. It has very little in the way of military power. And where is it going to get that? The United States will not arm Syria. The United States has also told Syria it will not lift sanctions if they go back to Russia. So Syria has very few people that will arm it. China won't arm it because they've given Uyghurs many top positions in their military. So Turkey is the obvious answer to get those arms. And that's what Israel is frightened of. Turkey is going to try to build up the Syrian military so Syria can control the country, and particularly the Kurdish region in the northeast, where America is presently protecting the Kurds. And that is Erdogan's major concern. And he would like to build up the Syrian government so that it's strong enough in order to dismantle this autonomous region and impose Syrian state authority once again over the northeast of Syria. All of this means, of course, that Israel will have to contend with a stronger Syria, which it doesn't want to do. And so there is this arm wrestling that's going on. And Israel has superior air power. It's backed by the United States. It can bomb these implantations, but Turkey will find other ways to build up the Syrian military.
OK, I would like to talk about the Kurds in a moment with Barin. But first, back to you, Alain. This idea that Israel wants to keep Syria weak because it's worried about what might happen in Syria, doesn't that just mean, because it means no stability for the people of Syria, that these poor people who have suffered for 54 years under dictatorship, have had a war that lasted nearly 14 years, are going to be left in a perilous condition because of what Israel wants?
Israel and the Israeli security forces think about themselves and about defending Israel. And what they say is, look at the history of Ashara, and this will also be his future. So if this is the leader, we don't give him the credit for moderate language until now. We see him as a potential enemy. And we will not allow this guy and this regime to have an army that can cause us any damage. So for Israel, in fact, it doesn't matter if he does it on his own or somebody is helping him or Turkey is helping him. Israel is determined not to have weapons on Syrian soil that can hit villages inside Israel, especially not rockets. And you remember how many thousands and tens of thousands of rockets just hit Israel in the last 15, 16 months. So this is the Israeli position. Now, there is a very big difference if Turkey stays aside or not, or goes in. Because if Turkey goes in, the Israel knows Turkey very well. Some of the Turkish weapons we assisted to create and build. We had a military alliance with Turkey in the 90s. So we know the Turkish army fantastically well. We trained with the Turkish army. Israel knows that once Turkey goes down, the abilities, the military abilities of Turkey in the service of Syria can become a threat.
OK, and, I want to bring in Barin now, if I can, Alain, on the issue of the Kurds, the Kurdish dimension of this. Is that key, do you think, to President Erdogan's thinking?
Kurds are certainly a very important aspect of this. But as they say, all politics is local. And to give some more context to our viewers, at present, the political wing, if you will, of the PKK, the militant Kurdish organization I mentioned earlier, are trying to broker a deal between the Turkish government and the PKK to have the organization disarm. It's mostly based in the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq. And if the PKK does disarm, then its Syrian offshoot, at least as far as Turkey is concerned, would be more amenable to patch its differences with Ankara and integrate their forces with the central government in Syria. As you know, last month there was an agreement between the leader of the Syrian Democratic Forces, Mazlum Kobani, and President Shara to have Kurdish rights recognized in return for the oil and gas fields under SDF control, for the revenues to be shared by the central government. So a lot of these issues, you're absolutely,
Joshua, I'd like to bring you in if I can, because one figure we haven't mentioned yet, and it's very rare for this Inside Story programme not to mention him, is Donald J. Trump. Of course, he was in the Oval Office at the beginning of the week with Benjamin Netanyahu. He has offered to broker a relationship between Turkey and Israel and solve their problems. And of course, there are still 2,000 US troops in Syria, and President Trump has tried to pull his troops out. In fact, he's ordered them out twice, and it never actually happened. What's the US role here?
Well, it's very confusing what the U.S. role is. And Donald Trump, in a sense, gave a warning to Prime Minister Netanyahu during his meeting in the White House, in which he said that he's very good friends with Erdogan and that he doesn't really want Israel to get into a war with Turkey. He said, I will broker it. And he said, you have to be reasonable. Now, what does reasonable mean? We don't know. And Donald Trump has a notoriously short attention span, and he has many other things that he's worried about today. So it's not clear that he is going to restrain Israel in any real meaningful way. But clearly he doesn't want, America does not want its two closest allies in the Middle East, Turkey and Israel, to get into a fight, because that will inevitably draw the United States into the middle of a situation it doesn't want to be in. Now, will he withdraw his troops from Syria? That's the big question mark. He has made statements, as you mentioned, in the past that he wants to get out of this area. But on the other hand, Israel wants him to stay and has asked him to stay. U.S. troops have actually increased in number to over 2,000 recently. So there is worry that ISIS could again become a problem in the desert, and that's being used as the excuse to stay there. But America has control over 30% of Syrian territory, and many of the principal security people in the new administration, the new Trump administration, share Israel's deep skepticism about Ahmed Shara.
Okay.
And they believe that he's not a good character. And so
thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Joshua, very much. Thank you to all of our guests today, Barin, Kayaoglu, Joshua Landis and Alan Liel, for giving us the inside story. If you missed any part of the discussion, you can find the whole programme on our website, aljazeera.com. What should we discuss in our next edition? Let us know by posting on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or get in touch on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. Until next time, from me, James Bays, and the team here in Doha, please stay safe and well. Bye-bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.